38 weeks to go, let the games begin. It's a fantasy league. Gonna make some noise within. Got my team assembled, ready to take the crown. I'll dominate this league, tear it down to the ground. I've got my strikers up top, ready to score the goals. Midfield maestro in the show, control the flow. Defensive wall standing tall, won't let them through. Goalkeeper with the gloves, gonna save me too. 38 weeks to go, gonna rule this game. I'm the boss, yeah, I'll take fame with my fantasy team. Gonna rise to the top, no one can stop me. Gonna make them drop.
Hello everybody and welcome to 38 weeks to go. Game week 1 is done. We have 37 weeks left to go. I am your host, Nash, and let's get into it. How was your game week 1? Mine? I got 57 points, and 57 points is just bang on average because 57 was the weekly average for game week 1. So how am I feeling? I'll be honest, it's taking everything in me not to use my wild card. Well, it's tough, especially when you see your number 127. When the league grows that quickly, it's painful a bit sometimes. But the thing I've learned the most over my time is that you can't overreact in fantasy, especially to game week 1. Nothing is for sure. So as much as it hurts, I'm just going to hold it in and trust my judgment. Which was wrong, but my long-term judgment, not my initial judgment. So, game week 1 was all about defense. There was no real high-scoring game, and there were 6 clean sheets this weekend. So, 6 out of the 10 games played this weekend had a clean sheet. That's rare. And just like we had said in the preview pod, it seems like, well, at least my theory was that because the bottom 3 are not as weak as last season's bottom 3, especially there's no Sheffield, the goals that were reached last season won't be there. So midfield and defense might be king. The marquee game this weekend was Manchester City versus Chelsea. Chelsea have received a lot of criticism for losing that match, but there's no shame in losing to Manchester City. You are never in crisis when you lose to Manchester City. And it's not even like they were hammered. But if you look online and see the reviews of the match, you'd think that they were beaten by Sheffield 5-0. The one thing I learned from this game is that karma is a bitch. For whatever reason, Kukureya attacked Haaland after the Euros win, and Haaland just scored on him. Why? I don't know why he was looking for him, but just stay in your lane, be humble, and just keep it moving. So Haaland scored, and Kovacic had a good goal towards the end. Bernardo Silva got the assist, Kovacic got 3 bonus points, Haaland got 2, Ederson and Vardiol had 1. The most important thing about this match is that for the first time in a long time, Manchester City were able to win without Rodri. This weekend and probably the next weekend were affected by Europe's football and the Olympics football, in that a lot of people who featured heavily in the tournaments are playing limited minutes. And therefore, a lot of the lineups aren't what we expect them to be, or even our players are not playing as much as we thought they would. Chelsea didn't look as disjointed as you thought they would. Lavia seems to be an interesting prospect. The squad is still too deep. Palmer and Nkunku, I know many people had those 2 players, didn't do much, 2-1. But like I said, they were playing the champions. They are the champions for a reason. One of the things we spoke about last week was a new manager. We don't know what a team will look like under a new manager. But also a new manager against Pep, that doesn't make sense. So we will see who Chelsea are as the league continues. But one thing that was interesting from the Chelsea camp was that, first of all, Lavia looked good. and I think he would have done really well under Pochettino last season. So let's see what happens this year. Another thing is Sterling, just as a game was being announced, his camp released a statement saying that they're unhappy and they want clarity on his future within the team. In such a big squad, I don't think that was the right move. So we may never see Sterling. So if you're a Sterling lover, just know that this might affect his opportunities to play for Chelsea. He may be moved on. Speaking of new managers, the highest scoring match was Brighton 3, Everton 0. I won't lie, I wasn't sure what to expect, which is why I steered clear from Brighton, but they literally look the same. It seems like Brighton hire similar manager profiles because if you remember, when Potter left, De Zerbi came in and it even looked the same. Now De Zerbi is gone and their new manager, Fabian Hutzler, 31 years old, looks like he was the assistant manager for these two managers and he has just picked up where they left off and Brighton look amazing. Mitoma is back and just back amongst the goals. The funniest thing, I didn't quite watch this match, but I was watching, I think, the Arsenal game or I was watching a different game when this match was going on. And one of my friends told me, Everton has a red card. I was like, it must be Ashley Young. And it's probably because he dropped Mitoma. I don't know if you remember last season. Ashley Young and Milner got red cards because younger people were just running at them and they could just not stop them. So when that was proven to be true, I was really excited about that. We all know Mitoma is a danger when he runs straight at you. There's almost nothing you can do. He just puts you on skates, you know? Now, in the previous pod, we spoke about Mente, and I told you how I was impressed with his preseason. He will be, by the end of this season, if he stays fit, one of the most selected players from Brighton. He'll be like Mitoma from the year before, should they stay fit. Brighton do not have Europe this year, so their commitments will be less than they were last season, and if they stay fit, they will be trouble. Mitoma scored a really good goal. Welbeck's goal was also really good. He just ran through the middle and just placed it. And Adingra's placing was beautiful. Mente, Welbeck, and Mifa had the assists. Welbeck had 3 bonus points, Veltman had 2, and Steele had 1. I know it's 3-0 and it's not a great result for Everton, but they weren't as bad as the results show. They had their chances, they had a goal disallowed. Steele got a bonus point for a reason. But if you were to ask me right now, I would tell you that Everton, Ipswich, and Southampton are my favourite for going down. Southampton, if you saw that game, or if you watched the highlights, you will know that they had an absurdly high percentage of domination of possession. Now, Newcastle got a red card, and Bertrand Diaz could not capitalize on the chances he had, nor could the rest of the Southampton team. And if this is what they're going to do against 10 men, I'm not very encouraged by their future. Isak had an assist for Joe Linton. It was a mistake from the back, and I don't know. We'll see. Southampton will need to really improve in order to last. For those of you who had Trippier, I'm really sorry. He did not play, and you're probably better off choosing one of the centre-backs at this point because you just don't know if it will be Livramento or Lewis Hall or Trippier. So one of those 3 will always play, but which one? Who knows? Joe Linton got the 3 bonus points, Pope had 2, and Livramento had 1. If I'm Southampton, I'm feeling really gutted about that loss because you did everything. You even cheated your way through a red card. Well, you played the game, but you just weren't rewarded. Is it karma or the football gods? The most disappointing game of the weekend would have to be Spurs 1, Leicester 1. Leicester were not particularly great, but neither were Tottenham. Now, I would say if you are going to be getting into Tottenham, just know that they can't defend. Vardy scored. Welcome back to the Premier League, Vardy. He could have scored a second if the bounce was kinder to him. And he could be one to look out for. Leicester look like a Premier League team, which is surprising. I thought they would be weaker, but they weren't out of their depth in this game. Southampton and Ipswich looked out of their depth, but Leicester did not. Pedro Porro scored from a Maddison assist, and it just reminds me of last season how Maddison started. And the thing that really stood out to me this game week was that we should not have overthought it. This was just a game week for going with the trusted and the obvious. And by that I mean Salah scored, Arsenal kept a clean sheet, Saka scored, Mitoma scored, Manchester City won, Haaland scored, Porro was good, Semenyo scored, Wood scored, Mitoma scored, Wissa just picked up where he left off last season. There were some easy decisions to make, and when I look back, I see how I overthought my fantasy team. I just kept making drafts and drafts and drafts and drafts, and apart from maybe Wissa, I think absolutely almost 90% of the players who scored this opening weekend were in some variation of a draft in my team, and I'm sure that's also true for some of you. In my team, I had Arsenal goalkeeper in Raya and Ben White from Arsenal. That was great. I had Virgil from Man City and had Anderson from Crystal Palace, who did nothing, got me a 0. In midfield, I had Bruno Fernandes, and he was unlucky not to score. He had like 3 chances to score, scored nothing. Gordon, I'm not going to think too much about Newcastle because there were 10 men. Kulusevski was a bad decision for me. I didn't know he wouldn't start. I just went on pre-season form. Luis Diaz, I don't know, makes me feel like I should have gone for Jota because I was trying to not have Salah. Because I wasn't sure how Salah would play because they had a new manager and he didn't seem to have been performing under him so far. And Diaz looked like he was benefiting from the new management. Anyway, I was wrong. Up in front, I had Wood, who scored. He had 9 points. Haaland, who scored, had 7 points. Isak had an assist. My captain was Isak. My forward line was the best performing part of my team and ended up with 57. A straight bang on average. Now, let's look at the top performers of the week. When it comes to goalkeepers, the top performer was Pope, who had 9, followed by Raya, who had 8. He was tied with Manchester City's Ederson. At number 4 was a tie between Steele from Birmingham and Alisson from Liverpool. Onana rounded it off with 6. When it comes to defenders, Pedro Porro was a top performing defender with 9. Veltman was second with 8, tied with Alexander-Arnold and Mazraoui from Manchester United. It's a great debut. In fourth, there was a tie for 7 with Gvardiol, Dalot, Martinez. So you will see that the better performers of the week, and by that I mean the managers, had a lot of Manchester United defenders. So Gvardiol had 7, Dalot had 7, Martinez had 7, Livramento had 7. And then with 6 you had Gabriel, Saliba, White, Zinchenko, Collins, Dunk, Van Heck, Robertson, Virgil van Dijk, Akanji, Rico Lewis, Ruben Diaz, and Kraft. That is just a reflection of how many clean sheets there were this game week. Midfield had top performers. Salah had 14. Saka had 12. Kovacic had 11. Joelinton was tied with 11. Onana had 10. Mbeumo had 9. Semenyo, Mitoma, and Fatau from Leicester had 8, along with Diogo Jota. When it comes to forwards, Havertz has now been classified as a forward, and this hurts me because I really wanted him as a midfielder. That's probably the only reason I don't have him in my team. But anyway, he was a top-performing striker along with Welbeck. They had 12 each. Wissa had 11. Wood had 9. Vardy and Zixi had 8. Let's go over some stats from the weekend. So, to begin, Man U have more wins and more points from the opening matches of the Premier League campaign than any other side. They have 22 wins. Xerxes, who opened the scoring for this year, becomes the 15th Dutch player to score on his Premier League debut, with 4 of those coming from Manchester United, and 1 of those was on the bench, Mr. Ruud van Nistelrooy. The other 2 are Butner and Donny van de Beek. So, another stat. Mohamed Salah has become the outright leader for Premier League goals, 9, and goal involvements, 14, meaning he has 5 assists on match week 1 in the competition. Salah has now both scored and assisted in 32 different Premier League matches, and only Wayne Rooney has done more in the competition's history, with 36. Ipswich Town gave a debut to Ali Al-Hamadi, who became the first player from Iraq to play in the Premier League. That's awesome. And now Iraq has become the 124th country to be represented in the competition. In this year of 2024, Arsenal have won more points and more matches and scored more goals than any other side in the Premier League in 2024, in this calendar year, from January up to now. They have won 52 points and they've played they've had 17 wins of 19 games, and they've drawn 1 and lost the other. In this opening match, Arsenal had 2 players who both scored and assisted. Their last player to both score and assist was Cesc Fabregas in 2009-2010 season in Gameweek 1. Mr. James Milner has now played in 23 different Premier League seasons. He has now overtaken Ryan Giggs. Talk about longevity. In case you were wondering, Milner made his debut when he was 16. Talk about a great start. He was playing for Leeds at the time, and that was 2002. Another fun fact, his manager was 9 years old when he made his debut. So, he is 7 years older than his manager. At 39 years and 39 days old, Ashley Young became the oldest ever player to be sent off in a Premier League match. Danny Welbeck has now scored in 16 different Premier League campaigns, with only 6 players ever netting more. Ryan Giggs, number 1, with 21, Scholes with 19, Lampard with 18, along with John Terry and Jermaine Defoe, who had 17. And by those numbers, I mean different campaigns. Chris Wood has now scored on Game Week 1 of a Premier League season for 3 different clubs: Leicester, Burnley, and Forest. Only Sheringham and Les Ferdinand have done more in the competition's history. Sheringham with 5 and Ferdinand with 4. Different clubs. Remember us talking about Dean Huijsen, the Bournemouth defender who was signed by Juventus? Well, on his Premier League debut, he won 9 aerial duels against Forest, which was the most by any player in Game Week 1, and the highest number by a teenager, he is 19, in a Premier League match for any of the last 10 campaigns. So you see, I just wasn't talking up my ass. He is something. Newcastle versus Southampton, so interesting things happen. And one of them was that Southampton had 19 attempts, and it is the most in a Premier League match without scoring since May 2022 against Brentford, when they had 19 shots, while Newcastle only had 3 shots in the game, their fewest in a match in which they won, since defeating Eddie Howe's Bournemouth 1-0 with just 2 attempts. So it's not about how many chances you create, it's about what you do with what you have. Onana scored on his debut. No Douglas Luiz, no problem. They found an able replacement. He scored within 4 minutes of his debut, and that is the 9th fastest goal by a player on his debut. John Duran, who scored the winner for Aston Villa, has now scored 6 Premier League goals from only 616 minutes played, which is an average of a goal every 103 minutes, among the players to have scored 5+ goals. Only Haaland has averaged a better minutes to goal ratio, which is 85 minutes. Brentford have remained unbeaten for all of their Premier League Game Week 1 games, which is 4 times now. They've won 2 and drawn 2. And this is the most a team has done without losing a Game Week 1 fixture. Yohan Wissa became the first player to both score and assist in 3 consecutive Premier League games since Riyad Mahrez in 2021. Chelsea's game against Manchester City saw them field a team which didn't feature anybody over the age of 26, and the average age of the team was 23 years and 180 days. And in case you're wondering, that's the second youngest team of all time. The youngest team was Manchester City's 08-09 team against Villa, and they were 22 years and 360 days. Man City won the opening Premier League match for the 13th time in 14 campaigns, with the other being a loss to Tottenham in 21-22. Just like Salah, Jamie Vardy also has a scoring streak of Game Week 1s, and he scored his 8th Game Week 1 goal. And Salah, of course, has done more with 9. And only Teddy Sheringham, 39 years old and 133 days, has scored in the competition as an older player, because Vardy is 37 years old and 221 days. And that goal is his 137th goal in the top flight. Bumu scores in Game Week 1 for the second successive season. Since joining Manchester City in 2022, Erling Haaland has played 100 games and scored 91 goals. I'll say that again. He has played 100 games and scored 91 goals. This is why I'm a Haaland maximalist. In random news, the transfer market is still going on. The window has not yet closed. And for example, like now they're saying Gundogan may come back to City. I am seeing Joachim Anderson, formerly of Crystal Palace, will be moving to to Fulham. Bournemouth have signed Araujo from Barcelona. Brighton have signed a player called Jorginho. Bournemouth have signed a guy called Evan Nielsen. Forest have signed someone called Ramon Sosa. Ipswich have signed Cajuste. So there will still be additions to teams. Players will go. The teams are not yet settled. So keep that in mind as you make your teams. Looking at our league, last year we had 25 players. This season we have 192 players. Talk about growth. But also it means it's a much more competitive league. So if you're close to 192, you're not doing too well. Goodness, those are many numbers. As time goes, I will improve on how I report about the league. But right now, I'll just focus at the top. The top of our league is very, very strong. Escobar season is number 1. That is both the name of the team and of the manager. Now, every week I try to interview the weekly leader. But because our table and our league has just grown so quickly, so fast, I do not have contacts for everybody. So I am in the process of trying to get people's contacts. So if you're listening to this and you are a potential weekly leader, please hit me up with your contact info so that when you get there, we can do an interview. So I will keep pushing people to sign up for some survey. For those of you whose contacts I already have, don't worry about it and you already know who you are. For those who I don't know, please get in touch with us. 38 weeks to go, everywhere. That's how you'll get a hold of us. So, Escobar season, I don't know how to get a hold of you yet. So, Polisana. Escobar season has a really good team. It seems obvious when you think about it. Let's see. So, up front, he has Havertz and Isak. So, Havertz got 12, Isak got 5. In midfield, he captained Salah, who got 28 points. Then he has Saka, who got 12. Then he has Diego Jota, who has 8. Then he has Eze, who gave him 2, and Nkunku, who had 1. Eze was wrongfully disallowed a goal and an assist. So, just a bit like Fernandes, he was unlucky, but he was more unlucky. In defense, he had Trent, Pedro Porro, and Robinson from Fulham. And in goal, he had Raya. He didn't use any fancy things like a triple captain or anything like that, but that landed him 95 points. Congratulations. In number 2, we have a 3-way tie with Kojo Danso, Aboki Jr., and Anthony Koila, who all had 87 points. Number 5, we have 85 points, which is a 3-way tie between Fami Zulkifly, Marcos Pitta, and Kojo Danso. He seems to have 2 teams. Interesting. Malvin Kathrima, Kelvin, and Yaya are all tied for number 8 to 10 with 83 points. So that means at the top we have 95 points as our leader. The weekly global leader had 127, so that is not bad at all. At the bottom of the table, somebody had 31 points. And when you look at the team, you could see that people are just trying to be clever. This is how I feel my team looks. When you're like, if you look at his players, they're not bad players, but they just didn't perform. I mean, you have Watkins, Isak, Mateta, Palmer, McAllister, Son, Nkunku. Then you have Kukureya, Trent, and Emiliano Martinez, and Mr. Keane. Those are not bad players, but when things just don't go your way, they don't go your way. In the top 10, we had somebody use a triple captain and 2 people use their bench boost. So it seems like it's never too early to use your chips. I just wonder if that'll come to haunt them later. As low as it sounds, this will be the closest gap between our number 1 and our number last. So after Gameweek 1, there are really 2 types of players. Those who feel like they got it spot on, and those who may not be feeling quite as lucky, especially if you're close to 192. So, if you are one of those people who do not feel like it went your way, what should you do? Now, the truth about FPL is that we really don't know what's going to happen. All of us, our teams are a reflection of what we thought would happen, and now we have seen what has happened. But everything should be taken in context. For example, if you have Eze, you should probably be kind to yourself because the ref of the match literally apologized to him and the manager for wrongfully disallowing the goal. And sometimes this is just a metaphor for life. Sometimes you plan and God laughs. Things go the other way and it has nothing to do with you. Just because you were not rewarded today does not mean you will be not rewarded in the future, So I would encourage you to now have those diamond hands. Unless, for example, you have players who absolutely did not play. And there are a bunch of those. If you had players who did not play, fine. Now you know that they are not playing. Get rid of them. Replace them with players who will play. I have like 2 or 3 4.0 players who did not play, but I have now seen a list of players who did play. So I will be changing my non-players to players so that they don't lose the value. That kind of move makes sense. Now there's some players who may have gotten injured or have some kind of, like for example, Minte, it's not clear about his status because he was taken off for the concussion protocol. It is not clear if he will play. So I wouldn't rush to get him until you know better. Remember, you can get up to 5 free transfers. So this Premier League fantasy season will reward your patience. And after Gameweek 1, that should not make you rush. Don't rush. Just trust your decisions. So, for example, if you don't have Haaland, it would be a bit of a mess to now try to rearrange your team to bring in a 15-point player, a 15, you know what I mean, value player. Now they're playing Ipswich, and Ipswich look like they will be beaten. But there's a reason you didn't have Haaland to begin with. So trust that until you're proven otherwise. But also 191 goals in 100 games. If you must take a point deduction, I guess the best question is, well, that you should answer is, will the player that I'm bringing in cover the points that I lose? Will the player I bring in improve my team over a series of fixtures? Am I making this decision right now just because I feel hurt, or because it is beneficial for my team in the long run? If you haven't already made moves, I would suggest you wait until the end of the press conferences that the managers will hold so that you can know how they're thinking and how they're going to approach the game week. At this point, one of the reasons I say do not overreact is because after game week 1, you can't tell that these will be the top performers of the year. It will make much more sense to make this kind of decision much later when there's a body of work. So, please look at the fixtures. Come up with a system that will make sense to your team over the next 2 to 5 game weeks. The motto for this podcast and this page in general is take it 1 week at a time. And this is why, because a lot of emotions can mislead you, but just remember, take it 1 week at a time. This is supposed to be fun, so this is the part where you just be patient. Just be patient. And as for you guys on the other end, well, you seem to have things figured out so far, and I hope it continues for you. So, let's look at Game Week 2. Game Week 2 kicks off with Brighton versus Manchester United. Now, last time out, Brighton were impressive and Manchester United won, but they really weren't impressive. It wasn't the kind of performance where you look and you say, man, you are back, you know? They were impressive at the back. Onana made one really great save. But I think Brighton, especially from the wings, presents a different kind of problem. Now, Manchester United do not have those old wing backs, so they might be able to keep up. But we shall see. I think there will be goals in this one. No clean sheets for both of these teams. As you may know, Brighton have the recent better record. In the last 5 games, Brighton have won 1, 2, 3, 4 out of the last 5 games in the Premier League. Manchester United winning the most recent one 2-0. I now believe that Brighton are still the better team, but anything can happen in a game of football. You saw Newcastle get a red card quickly, but should all things remain constant, I believe that Brighton will be the better team in this fixture. If Minte plays, he will be important. Mitoma, Welbeck, those are the top 3. I am not yet convinced of Brighton's defense, but if you already have a defender from them, that's fine. A lot of people have Manchester United defenders, so it'll be interesting to see how they go. I mean, they are better at the back, and Manchester United were ravaged by injuries last season, so let's see if fitness prevails and makes them better. If you are getting Manchester United players, it still isn't clear who the better players are. For example, I still believe Fernandes should be up there, but if you are one of those people who moves with the times, you might be able to jump in on Xerxes. He may start, but also he may not start. It might still be Haaland or Rashford. And those are the kind of decisions you have to make. So most people will probably end up still remaining with their defenders, and maybe Garnacho, but Garnacho came off the bench, so maybe you're not too confident. Or maybe Garnacho and Xerxes will start. It's quite unclear, and these are the things about the early part of the season. Managers are still testing to see what they have. So, Brighton, you have Mitoma, Minte, Welbeck. Manchester United, you have Fernandes, Xerxes, Garnacho. and whoever you have from their defense. After Manchester United, Brighton will have Arsenal, and then they'll have an easier run of fixtures in Ipswich and Nottingham Forest. So it might be good to hold on before getting into Brighton if you haven't already. Or if you have, the Arsenal fixture will be tricky, but then it gets a bit lighter after that. For Man U, you get Brighton now, which is a tricky fixture historically for them. And then you have Liverpool, and then it eases a bit in that they have Southampton and Crystal Palace. Southampton will be an easier fixture. Crystal Palace maybe not, but we'll see. And then they have Spurs, which will be an open game. So their fixtures are not straightforward. The next game will be Crystal Palace versus West Ham. Both teams were not great in their last time out. Crystal Palace were unfortunate against Brentford in that they had a goal disallowed, as it was particularly unlucky. So maybe karma will be kinder to them this game round. West Ham were just poor. Lopetegui, I don't like him, but he also didn't give any of his signings a real start. Maybe he's the kind of manager who wants people to sort of earn their place. So it is possible that this lineup will be different from the last one. His team is not yet settled, and West Ham will be interesting to follow because they have good players. It's just a matter of seeing if he can put them all together in a way that produces on the field. Crystal Palace won their last two games 3-1 and 5-2 and 4-3. When they win, it's big. They have won 4 out of the last 5 games against West Ham. So the odds are looking in their favor. West Ham have been poor against Crystal Palace, but there is no clean sheet in this fixture over the last 5 games. So do not expect one. If you are getting Crystal Palace players, you should think of Munoz, Eze, and Edouard or Mateta. I think Mateta will be back to starting. It really depends on how the manager assesses his recovery from the Olympics. For West Ham, Paqueta scored for them, and he, Kudus, and Bowen are their 3 best players for now. After Crystal Palace play West Ham, they have Chelsea, Leicester, Man U, and Everton. So this might be the right time to get into Crystal Palace players. West Ham, on the other hand, have Manchester City, Fulham, Chelsea, Brentford. So it's a mixed bag. Fulham will be looking to play Leicester this weekend, and they will be looking for better result than they got against Manchester United. They were without João Palhinha, but it didn't look like they missed him in the midfield. This test against Leicester will help determine whether Leicester are truly back or if Fulham are who we think they are. In their last 5 encounters, Fulham have won 3 out of the 5 games. But that was a different time, and I don't know how reflective of their matchup that is. I would still give it to Fulham just based on recent experience. I don't expect Leicester to keep a clean sheet in this game. The traditional best performers for Fulham have been Leno, Robinson, Pereira. And those are the 3 I would recommend. Emil Smith-Rowe had a great preseason, but not yet. Traore, not yet. Iwobi, sometimes. So those are the 3 I would recommend. From the Leicester side, now that I've seen a game of theirs, I would say, of course, Jamie Vardy, and then you have Fatawu and the Cordova-Reid. I wouldn't invest in the defenders, even though I have one of the defenders, but only because he's 4.0. After the Fulham game, Leicester have Aston Villa, Crystal Palace, Everton, and Arsenal. That doesn't look easy. I mean, they are a promoted team, so none of these fixtures will be easy, but this is not an easy run. Fulham, on the other hand, have Ipswich, West Ham, Newcastle at home, and Forest. those are all winnable games, especially since Newcastle don't quite do well away from their place. Man City versus Ipswich. Now, Man City beat Chelsea. It looked like they didn't even get out of second gear. It just felt like they just decided, okay, let's just beat them, and they did. So Ipswich will be an interesting challenge because I always find that it's in these games that you find an upset, like when they lost to Norwich that one time. So they will have to remain focused. Ipswich remind me a lot of Burnley last season, where they have this certain style of football they want to play, and it worked really well for them in the Championship. And you saw this in the first half against Liverpool. Liverpool barely did anything in the first half, but then they can't keep it up because of stamina and the pace of the Premier League. And with the pressing that Manchester City can do, they can force a lot of errors in this game. And I am heavily leaning towards Manchester City damaging these guys. I expect them to force Ipswich to make many mistakes and them to just capitalize. Of course, Haaland will be my captain, and if you have him, he should be your captain. After Haaland, Savinho looked really good against Chelsea. And Kovacic also was impressive. No Rodri, no problem. Bernardo Silva tends to show up in important games. This isn't an important game, so it'll probably be somebody else. If you have your defenders from City, keep them. From the Ipswich side, I was really impressed with their defender Greaves when I watched the game. And that's about it. But I wouldn't recommend you getting a defender from Ipswich, so I don't have anybody to recommend from this game. If you have to, maybe Omari Hutchinson, but I don't know why you'd be getting into Ipswich players against Manchester City. After Manchester City, Ipswich will play Fulham, Brighton, Southampton, and Aston Villa, which are, I guess, okay games. Especially after starting with Liverpool and Manchester City, everything feels better. So it'll be a relatively good run for them. Doesn't mean they win, but it'll be better. City, on the other hand, have West Ham, Brentford, Arsenal, Newcastle. In theory, those are difficult games. Maybe only the Arsenal game will be really tricky for them. But outside that, I don't think such a thing as a tough game for City exists. Maybe only Real Madrid. Southampton versus Nottingham Forest. Southampton let themselves down against Newcastle. They should have won that game, and they should have scored at least one goal. At least. Brereton Diaz just wasted them. And now, he is the first player I recommend if you're getting to Southampton, because clearly he knows where to be, and in theory it'll be a matter of time just before they start falling in. And then maybe you have Armstrong. If you have to get another player, I would say maybe Aribo, but that's about it. Nottingham Forest were unlucky to draw with Bournemouth last time out. Both of the goals in that game were bad, but Semenyo's was particularly bad. It shows that you just have to play focused the whole game, and you can't afford to make silly mistakes, and that was a silly mistake. Wood scored, and he will be the first person I recommend from Nottingham Forest. After him, I would say Morgan Gibbs-White, and your choice between Callum Hudson-Odoi and Elanga. Now, one thing which happened in the last game, which hadn't happened in a while, is Sangare played for Forest, and he has changed how their midfield looks. I feel like they will be a stronger team than they were last season. I'm not going to say too much, but it's like he's their Kante. I feel like that's an exaggeration, but that's the kind of role he has for them. He was immense in this last game. Southampton have Brentford, Man United, Ipswich, Arsenal and Bournemouth after this, so it's a mixed bag. They can do okay in these fixtures. Forest have Wolves, Liverpool, Brighton, Fulham and Chelsea. With Forest, Wolves is a winnable game. Liverpool, they should be beaten. Brighton should be open. Fulham can be open, and Chelsea, we just don't know. We don't even know who will be there by the time this game arrives. Tottenham versus Everton. Everton draw this game at home and they lose it away. So it means in the last 5 games, Tottenham have beaten them 3 times and they've drawn twice. Everton are at home, so the most likely result is a draw. There are no clean sheets in the most recent fixtures, and Tottenham really struggle to defend. It doesn't make any sense, but they struggle to keep clean sheets. And to that end, I think it'll be maybe 1-1, 2-2, 3-3, even though I do believe that Tottenham are the better team. But there's just something about Everton at home that Spurs haven't yet figured out. If you had to get an Everton player, I would still recommend a defender because that's the only real position you can get from Everton. Pickford or Mikolenko. With the attackers, you're really getting nothing from them. They don't score goals. And it's tough. So you have, well, if you have to choose an attacker, you have Dominic Calvert-Lewin or Doucouré. That's about it. Maybe if you want, you can say Dwight McNeil. Or even Gueye. He had a good finish to the end of the season last time out. My problem with Spurs right now is that I don't know what to make of them. I think the best players would be Pedro Porro, Son and Maddison. Solanke looked good in his debut, but he only really had one chance. I feel like they haven't yet figured out how to get the best out of him. I had Kulusevski and I'll be getting off of him. The funniest thing about this fixture is that in the last 3 games, Richarlison has been the best performer in this particular fixture, but I am not convinced he will even start. After Everton, they will play Newcastle, Arsenal, Brentford, Manchester United. So those are not easy games for them. And I wouldn't be getting into Tottenham for these next set of fixtures. Everton, on the other hand, play Bournemouth, Villa, Leicester, Crystal Palace, and Newcastle. There's no such thing as an easy fixture for Everton. The best you can really be hoping for when looking at them is a draw. So do these games look drawable? And if you feel like they are, or they can win 1-0, then that's when you get into Everton. Aston Villa versus Arsenal. These 2 fixtures, in my opinion, are the games that lost Arsenal the trophy last year. Last season, Arsenal were beaten twice by Aston Villa. Last year was Aston Villa's best season probably ever. And now we'll be looking to see if this is real or if this is not. Now, the thing about new teams that get into the Champions League is that this season tends to be much tougher for them, especially from a rotation perspective and just availability of players. Right now, it's still early and the demands of Europe have not yet begun. We saw what it did to teams like West Ham and particularly Brighton last year. So that's one thing you should be looking out for when thinking about Aston Villa and their players. Emery will be forced into rotations, and people like Watkins may be the ones to suffer. But that's for later. Right now, I would think that Arsenal are the better team, but they have a poor record, or at least a poor recent record. So this is a game where we have evidence that they have not beaten them in their last 2 games and they have lost both of them. So having an Arsenal defender, you may want to have just 1 instead of 3. Bailey, Watkins, and McGinn are the 3 scorers in the last 2 games that they have played. Arsenal have not scored in the last 2 games. If Arsenal are to win this one, you know it's going to be Saka, Havertz, and probably Odegaard and Trossard. Those are the 3 places where attacking returns will come from. It will be a gamble to stick with Arsenal defenders, especially if you have more than 1. But I'm just going to do that because my bench is trash. After Arsenal, Aston Villa will have Leicester, Everton, Wolves, Ipswich, and then Manchester United. Those are very good-looking fixtures. Arsenal, on the other hand, will have Brighton, Tottenham, City, Leicester, Southampton. So it ramps up in difficulty and then it becomes easy. So choose your players wisely. Both of these teams looked impressive last time out, and so this will be a good fixture to test where they are. Although it's still early, but sometimes it's best to get these games out and early. Next, we have Newcastle versus Bournemouth. In the last 5 fixtures, we have 3 draws and then 1 win for each team, which means that this matchup is fairly balanced. Newcastle are away from home, so don't bother captaining anybody from their team. They will probably not do so well. But Gordon, Isak are still the best players to get from Newcastle. And now Joelinton. From Bournemouth, it's not clear who the Solanke replacement is, but of course you start with Semenyo. I am of the belief that Sinisterra will have a great season. And then Ouattara or Tavernier. I think this is a kind of game where both teams will score. I can easily see a 1-1 or a 2-2. Bournemouth will have Everton, Chelsea, Liverpool, Southampton and Leicester after this. So these are all winnable games apart from the Liverpool game. So if you can figure out who the player is to be having from that team is, I think you'd be good for some few returns here and there. After Bournemouth, Newcastle have Spurs, Wolves, Fulham and City. Whew. And only one of those games is at home. Oh, it's City and Spurs will be tricky for them, but they could win the other ones. Wolves versus Chelsea. None of these teams were impressive last time out. Wolves have beaten Chelsea 3 of the last 5 times they've played. They've lost 1 and drawn 1. This fixture has tended to be a high-scoring game, which suggests that both teams could have a return. Cunha had a hat-trick the last time these two teams played, and that could be trouble. With Chelsea, the squad is so big, it's hard to know who will play. With a squad so big, of course he's still experimenting, and of course he doesn't know what his best 11 is. When you have a squad of 45, how can you know who your best 11 players are? So if you're looking to get Chelsea assets, of course I would encourage you not to get their defenders. But if you are getting their forwards, I would say Palmer and Nkunku. Those are the players that started the last game, and that's the only reason I'm recommending them, particularly Palmer, because I know he will probably play every game. Maresca will probably introduce Dewsbury Hall at some point because that's his guy. It's just a matter, will it be for Enzo Fernandez? And the funniest thing is, I think Enzo will find himself out of this team quicker than most people think, because even last season, Chelsea were just better when he didn't play. I wonder if that will be true this time around. On the Wolves side, I would encourage people to get Huang, that Korean guy. Now, the tricky thing is Larsen started the last game, and it's not clear whether this is going to be a permanent thing or if now Cunha will come. So they also need to figure out where the goals will be coming from, since Neto will not be providing the assists. Goodness, Neto's in Chelsea, and we didn't even talk about him. We don't even know if he'll play. But the jokes are that he was signed to give Harris James company in the treating room. So from the players who started the last game, I would say Huang, Larsen, and probably Aitnouri. Aitnouri was dangerous. And for a wing-back who plays as a winger, it's a fun prospect. It's just that you don't expect clean sheets from Wolves. Wolves have Forest, Newcastle, Villa, Liverpool, and Brentford next. So these are not games you want to be having Wolves players in. Maybe after those fixtures, that's when you start to look at them. In a way, they could be in contention for relegation, but it's still too early. Chelsea will be playing in Europe, some qualification stuff, and then after that they'll have Crystal Palace, Bournemouth, West Ham, Brighton, and Forest. Now, the thing with Chelsea is that these are all winnable games. But winnable doesn't mean they'll do it. Chelsea is just still so unpredictable, and we don't even know what Maresca is doing yet. So these are also losable games. And until we get a steady picture of who they are, I would suggest patience. The last fixture of the weekend will see Brentford take on Liverpool at home. Both teams were impressive the last time out. As you heard earlier, Wissa is the first player in a while to have a goal and an assist every game. Well, for the last 3 games, let me not exaggerate. For the last 3 games, he's had a goal and an assist. So he will be the first player I would recommend if you're getting into Brentford. The thing is, Liverpool have been the better team in this fixture. They have won 4 out of the last 5 games. The one they lost was when Brentford were at home, but they have been comfortable winners in this game. I don't see why that would change this time round. That's not to take anything away from Brentford, but Liverpool are just the better team. I did joke that a Brentford defender tends to score, and Pinnock did score, just not on the right side. Now, if you're looking for a Brentford player, I really can't look beyond Wissa and Bumo. If you're wondering why Ivan Toney didn't play, it's because there's a lot of transfer speculation around him right now, and the manager thought that with his head in the clouds, he might not be performing well on the pitch. So until, I guess, the window closes, he will not be a starter. And so look at Wissa to start and Bumo. Those should be your first 2 players. Liverpool are very interesting. They started very poorly in the first half against Ipswich. And then they made a change at halftime. And they removed Kwanzaa and brought in Konate. And now this is where choosing Liverpool players is interesting, because a lot of people who may have had Kwanzaa will be in limbo right now, because the manager said that he brought in Konate because they needed to win more duels. And they did after he came on, and they won. So he will not be starting. I really wanted to get Robertson in for my team, but when I looked at the preseason, he hadn't played. It was Tsimikas who played pretty much all the games, and then Robertson just started game 1. So that was a bit frustrating. And that's the thing about new managers, which is annoying. Now, in the last game, Salah was the best performer with a goal and an assist, and then Jota and Soboslai. I have Diaz. I chose the wrong player, but I'm still going to stick with him. And then I will make my decision after this. Jota played. I thought Nunez would start, but he didn't start. He didn't even play. And so Liverpool are tricky because you could find that Gakpo plays now. But anyway, if you're looking to get into this team, Salah should be your first player. If you don't have him and you can't afford him, then you should look into Jota, Soboslai, and Diaz. If you're the guy who has their defenders, especially a guy like Trent, keep him. But do not do the Kwanzaa Konate thing. If you're getting another defender, get Van Dijk or Robertson. After Brentford, Liverpool have Man U, Forest, Bournemouth, Wolves, and Crystal Palace. These are all winnable games, and I believe people should be looking to move into Liverpool assets, especially since it's clear that Liverpool have transitioned like Brighton, with a manager who seems to know what he is doing. After Liverpool, Brentford will play Southampton, City, Spurs, West Ham, Wolves. So it'll be easy and then tough, and then it calms down a bit. I guess with Brentford, it's about deciding who do you think will score, even if they're playing a challenging competitor. When it comes to captaincy, who are you looking at? When I look at the fixtures, the easiest captains that stand out to me come in the following fixtures: Man City versus Ipswich. I can see Haaland being a favorite here. Let's look at Liverpool versus Brentford. I can see a Liverpool player being either Jota or Salah being captain here easy. I don't really see people jumping on the Aston Villa Arsenal game, so I'm not sure an Arsenal captain would be wise. Spurs Everton, I could see somebody gambling here with maybe a Pedro Porro, maybe not quite Son. Newcastle Bournemouth, I could still see people going for Isak even if he scores very poorly away from home. Southampton versus Nottingham Forest, I could easily see somebody going for Wood here. Brighton Man United, this one's tough. Maybe Mitoma, maybe Fernandez. And that's really about it. And with that, I hope Gameweek 2 is better for all of us. See you next week. Bye.